The American model on DEI has been criticized because it tends to be exported instead of customized, which it really needs to be. Even just starting with diversity, what does diversity mean in a particular country? We look at our customers, we look at our demographics and geography, and we look at our customers, which could be global, but can also be local. And we say, where do we not reflect that world?
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I'm Af Malhotra, your host. And today's episode is in collaboration with Diversity Economics Institute. And as you know, that is a huge part of my life. It's my passion, it's my purpose. And my guest today is an individual, an author, a thought leader, a business leader who has not only written a whole number of books on this topic, and her latest book, How to Be an Inclusive Leader, with the subtitle, Your Role is Creating Cultures of Belonging Where Everyone Can Thrive, is a veteran in this game. In fact, she's been doing this for a long time, and before the hype, I would say. And I'm enamored by her work. I have spent time studying her work and the book she's written, and the latest book as well. And some of the models and techniques and tools that our guest today has been discussing in her book is not a not a nice to have. It is a must have. It's a necessity. It's kind of mandatory for any leader, not just the CEO, the HR, the D&I leader, any leader in any functional role, to really sit down and consider and debate and discuss with this author and her business, and of course the team internally. We're going to talk a lot about D&I today and all aspects and faces of it. I'd like to welcome the brilliant Jennifer Brown on my show. Jennifer, welcome to Straight Talk. What a pleasure to have you.
Oh, Af, I can't wait for this conversation. Very, very excited. I know it will be rich.
Yeah, ditto. And I can't wait either. So let's go right into it. We usually start the show by, requesting our guests to talk about who you are, your brief personal story, the journey to this book. I believe it's your fourth book, if I've got the number right. Mm-hmm. And this is the second edition, updated and expanded. And tell us what got you to this point. What was a series of events, a trigger? Unpack it for us.
Thank you. Thank you for having me and the invitation to go back before we go forward. In our field of DEI, most of us there did not study it, right? We were drawn to it by passion, and we remain there because it's hard, because of passion, honestly. But for me, I was always wanting to make the world a better place. I was absolutely came out of school, got jobs in nonprofits, was always an advocate and an activist, I would say, in my earliest days. But I was also a singer. And I had big dreams of moving to New York and becoming the opera music theater performer. And I had, been a performer my whole life. So I finally got the chance to move to New York and study that. And I got a master's in vocal performance. And, P.S., life would have other plans for me because my voice kept getting injured, and I had to get a couple surgeries, and I lost my voice, truly. I gained it back, but it would be compromised. It would be less than what I would really need in order to do the arduous schedule of a working performer. And it was heartbreaking. And, I felt like I'd worked my whole life to get to that place. But then I realized, as I just, breathed through it like we should, with challenges and crises, and say, what is the message here? And I have a wonderful mentor that said there's so much you can translate into other fields from this. And of course, performers are brilliant at a bunch of things because of all the resilience we develop and how we improvise and how we connect to audience and all that. Those are the building blocks of business. Yeah. So I would eventually find my way to another field of study. Because I was so comfortable in one stage, somebody else said, why don't you teach and facilitate adults in the workplace? Why don't you look into training? And particularly leadership training. And I went back to school, got another master's in that, fell in love with the discipline. I just found it so fascinating to think about the human in the organization and where there are disconnects, which is essentially what I study today as well. But I didn't know it at the time. And eventually I would kind of pivot my life into the world of maybe macro. It's the HR world, right? It's the talent. It's the people who study workforce and workplace dynamics. and organizational change and systems. And I would end up starting, sort of getting laid off at one point from my corporate HR job and starting my own company 20 years ago, and not really knowing, just knowing that I was passionate about this, but not having a ton of experience, especially as an entrepreneur for sure, but also knowing that I could facilitate conversations. That's one thing I knew. And yeah, and so I started by training a lot, studying and being in different rooms, different companies with managers all over the country and the world, listening to their pain points, really developing a point of view about what is broken in the system as it is. Again, but though without having a D&I lens, because this was 20 years ago, and we were not, a lot of us were talking about it. Certainly the work is old, but it was a very, very niche conversation. So I fell in love though with thinking about and developing then a point of view on what would I do differently? How would I construct a different workplace? If I had the magic wand.
Right.
And I also knew, and this is another piece of the story, that I'm in the LGBTQ plus community, but I had struggled with belonging all through, whether it was as a performer who literally was terrified of anybody knowing exactly who I am and how I identify because I thought I wouldn't get cast, to a corporate person who was terrified because everybody was closeted in corporate. And that was 20 years ago. And it's changed a little, but actually, it's still pretty dire. Some of the most recent reporting show a lot of people who are closeted in the workplace about who they are. And then kind of progressing, beginning to fold in this identity that I carry and the experience that I had as part of the wisdom and expertise that I could bring. And I married that to organizational change. And when I founded Jennifer Brown Consulting, we began to lean into how identity impacts belonging, effectiveness, productivity, retention, organizational change, and then how these missing identities, in my case, and in so many cases of anybody who's underrepresented, why is that a problem? Why is that a missed opportunity? Why is that very hard on the individual, obviously, and not at all fair or equitable, but also bad for business, for the bottom line, for, all of us to really thrive and anticipate the future. So JBC, my company, we ended up morphing from a leadership development company into this DEI space. And I've been there ever since, writing, speaking, getting super comfortable with all of the parts of my identity, teaching from those places, and really trying to raise awareness of yes, we've learned the workplace is broken, especially in the last couple of years, especially for all the reasons we know, but I've known it for a really long time because I didn't feel a sense of belonging all through my experience. And I wasn't able to be maybe as brilliant as I could have been or contribute or feel comfortable enough to raise my voice. It was a real struggle. And so not everyone can be an entrepreneur. We have to make these companies and help these companies be better, because that's really the engine, such a big engine of our economy and our means to make a living. And honestly, our place that we can find purpose as well. I mean, I do think those of us who can't be entrepreneurs and kind of truly follow that dream and build something out of whole cloth, we can still have a very rich experience in a larger workplace as an employee and as a leader at any level in those systems. But we can also change those systems for the better. And that's what we've been seeing over the last couple of years, is that groundswell and that sort of honesty, that raw honesty of people sharing what it's been like. And I can relate. I mean, I can relate, and I don't relate on all identities, but just conceptually, I feel if I could be a messenger for everyone that hasn't been heard, for everyone that has wondered and questioned their own belonging, I need to elevate that into the rooms that I can get into. And that's how I see my role these days.
Wow, fabulous. So let me just touch on a few very important parts of it. So as I was listening to you, I was, extrapolating things that are important from a D&I standpoint. So it's interesting. You started off in one avatar or in one incarnation with your music, and you faced some trauma or difficulties, and somehow you found the resilience to get through it and then reinvent yourself. Okay. Question for you. When did you come out? What stage was it? Was it pre-music, post-music, pre-consultancy, post-consultancy?
Pre and pre.
Pre and pre. Okay.
I actually been out for 25 years.
Wow.
So it was when was that? It was maybe mid 90s aughts, I guess.
Okay.
And yeah, so but that was pre trying to make it as a performing artist, and sort of struggling with being typecast and understanding that casting directors don't have the biggest imagination in the world. I don't know what it's like now, but back then you just tried to play the part, and the part that I would play was always the heterosexual, young, like bride,
Mm.
sister. Everybody wanted to put me as Sandy in Grease, the musical. And I was not having it. I mean, even just personality, I wasn't having it, because I wanted something more meaty to
Mm.
do and to work on, and I wanted challenging parts, and I wanted complex parts. So I think even if the voice hadn't failed me, I know that I would have been grown really frustrated with that life.
Mm.
But also just to feel like, if I tell the truth about my life, that I couldn't work. It was, I mean, that's very stark. That's a stark, hard realization. And then though, to feel I could do something about it and turn my energy towards, actually tackling that exact issue, like all the fear around authenticity. I didn't even know it was a field. I didn't know it wasn't even DEI back then. It was not
Yeah.
even it was D. It was it was diversity.
Yeah.
Um, and there were people that were working on this, but there was usually one per company, if there was even one person,
Sure.
that had that job. It was so new, particularly new with LGBT, because that conversation is not that old.
No.
We
No.
didn't even have domestic partner benefits back when I was starting. So way pre-marriage equality. And we were just trying to get companies to, begin to incorporate more inclusive language in their statements and their non-discrimination language, and mention the community in their training. I mean, just to mention it, or to look for the first time at marketing materials and say, whoa, we don't reflect this community at all. We're
Right.
assuming we're marketing to, I don't know, heterosexual married couples of a certain ethnicity. And now we're in a whole different world, but it's really important to remember what it used to be like, and
Mm.
not forget, because our work isn't done, obviously.
Yeah, yeah, you're bang on. And I think we have a long ways to go, of course. We've seen pockets of hope and excellence, and I'm sure you've seen that throughout your interactions. It's fascinating, really. You started 20 years ago. And when you describe that, I've been in these boardrooms and been to various companies, and there was no one really looking at D&I, just the D, if you're lucky. And
Yeah.
you're right. And to now, where, of course, now you're doing podcast after podcast, updating your books. And I'm sure you're super busy going into large organizations, having the conversation that I'm sure you've had to a large degree in a similar vein before, but now you're being heard. And it's bizarre, right? It is quite
It's bizarre.
interesting, um, when you're like shouting from the rooftops, this is the way to, salvation or whatever, and a cure to whatever disease, and no one's listening. And then one fine day, you're just patient, and then timing
Hmm.
is on your side. And let me go back to your journey, though. I find it interesting. So you're going through these different incarnations, right? Which is fascinating, because it takes, as I said, resilience, making
Mhm.
friends with uncertainty. That's a mantra I use throughout my life, making
Mm,
friends with
that's so
uncertainty.
good.
And so you're making friends with uncertainty constantly, but you're relying on the crutch of certainty, which is family, friends, support, what you're good at, your strengths,
Mm,
of course, going into leadership. And then you take on another challenge, make friends with uncertainty, you become an entrepreneur. I mean, that is
oh,
truly the whole intersectional piece. They don't talk about entrepreneurship, but
that's so true.
entrepreneurs are rare. And gosh, you have to truly reinvent many aspects of your personality to be an entrepreneur, so it actually should be one of the criteria of diversity, because entrepreneurs are different.
Yeah, we are.
We're all different. And
It's
so you
so true.
so you did that. You built a consultancy, and then you started to write. When did you write your first book? What was it called for the audience? And when did you write it? And why did you write it?
Yeah. Well, I have a weird story. So I did not enter this work 20 years ago. I put my name on the door, but I was not an expert. I might have been a leadership development facilitator and know a lot of things, but I was never an expert. And but my dream was to become, I think, the author and the speaker, and be on, be on TV, and
Mm.
have CEOs on speed dial, and I have some of those things now, which is really wild. And it was, vision is powerful, so be careful what you
Mm.
ask for. The universe will help you get it, and it did in my case. But I came from the back to the front in my business. Like I realized I had wonderful marketing skills and sales skills, and the ability to establish myself and my thought leadership. So, and I like to write, I like to communicate, and I was always a messenger. And I was always very, very good at that. The CEOing and the operations and the finance and the pieces that come along with entrepreneurship, not so much, but you can hire to complement yourself, right? And that's part of the important game as you scale your company. But I was very, I think, humble about not knowing and acknowledging there were talented people who'd been doing this for a long time. So I actually built my business through putting other people forward, is what I'm saying, and marketing them, and providing the house for all of us to live in, if you will. And it was a beautiful synergy of gifts, because I think there's those of us who want to deliver and not sell. There's those of us who want to sell and not deliver. There's, these are all the sides of the coin of successful companies. And finding your niche and really playing to your strengths if we're lucky enough to move beyond being the, everything to your business and the only person, you get to explore what really brings me joy, what really lights me up, and what is so easy for me that I'm in flow and I don't even notice the time. And I've been very clear about that for a really long time. And it has been, attracting people to us, building our community, not necessarily needing even though my name is on the door, not even necessarily needing to be the one that's in the room. And I maybe some people struggle with that because they want to be the expert. But for me, I was very comfortable approaching this in a community way, which was cool. So I brought people in, I watched them, I blessed them, I gathered that wonderful feedback on them, and felt heartened, not at all threatened, but always encouraged, always proud, always. So I've always been able to share this, which I'm just really great. And we still do. I mean, I think our field is interesting in that we're actually very transparent with each other, even if you're competitors, because we all are fueled by wanting the same outcome. And we all know that we do it all differently. We each have different approaches. So so, and then my first book, then, honestly, people had to drag me kicking and screaming to write it because I was, again, just really humble, like really, I don't know if I have anything to say. It's the usual jitters that honestly never go away. With every book you write, if you have the blessing of writing more than one, they never go away. They change. I mean, I think you have different teams supporting you over the years. You write with different people. The first one, though, was called Inclusion. And I wrote it, and I had a wonderful kind of co-writing team at the time. And just as it was a grab bag book, it was just, I don't think I had a strong point of view yet. And I certainly didn't have a model, which we're going to talk about later.
Yeah.
But it was my first foray. And then I wanted to speak. And I think it's very necessary, if you want to be a speaker, to have books. It just goes hand in hand. And it's something I always recommend to my mentees who want to achieve that. And so it helped me catapult onto stages, bigger fees, bigger audiences. It just legitimizes, right or wrong. It doesn't, what's in the pages, I'm not sure really matters sometimes. It's just the fact that you've written it and you've really put yourself out there. So it helped me get out there. But the structure of the book was a bit all like a meandering. It still actually has a great audience and it still sells really well. And I think it's a really good primer for people, but it wasn't me as evolved as I would become, which makes a lot of sense because I would subsequently move from kind of the behind the scenes to the front.
Yeah. One of the things I ask a lot of the authors regularly is, I mean, you're in a privileged position where you've written more than one or two books. And I always ask, what would you now do with this book, given it's 6 months or a year or a year and a half or 2 years? Usually people come on because they're, campaigning for the book and so on. Even if the time period is short, even if it's a quarter, Jennifer, you'll find the authors, because they've traveled, they've spoken on many forums, they've been interviewed, they've been questioned, and the power of questioning and the power of answering those questions when they've been asked is so incredible. I really believe it's a form of learning and education because it opens up neurons. The neurons start firing in zones in the brain that you've probably neglected. And it opens up just vast, seas of opportunity and ideas. And every single time I ask this question, the author always says, I've done 50 podcasts, and each podcast has allowed me to think about the next book. And I have another book in mind, or I have an update in mind. And that's the power of knowledge and education and lived experiences. And I'm sure the fifth one is coming out soon, or it's part of the plan. Let me go to the book now. So, How to Be an Inclusive Leader. And it's interesting that this word inclusive or inclusion, aside from the acronym now, it's such an important word. Now, let me throw something interesting at you for a moment. So when you think about, we're going off on a different path, and, I did promise you that we're going to go on different pathways.
Yes, do it.
So as I read your book, and I read many books, and I've read a whole load of books, because of course I'm a student of this topic, and I have a whole institute that's built on this. I started to realize that something that needs to be studied more, which is the global faces of diversity, okay, and inclusion and belonging and equity and so on and so forth. And as you have in your books, I realized that inclusion is a very important it's the lifeblood of this thing of diversity and all of the other aspects, because if one doesn't feel like they're part of something, you've anyway lost the game, right? And so walk me through, and I'll take you through into this whole area of the global faces momentarily. But before I do so, walk me through why you use the word inclusion. Why is it so important to you? And repeatedly, there's got to be something behind it, and I'm sure there's a story that backs that up. So why inclusion constantly?
Yeah, constantly.
Yeah,
you're right. One doesn't function without the other, and that the beauty of each of the D and the I can be squandered if it's not complemented by the other. And it goes both ways. I mean, you can be all inclusive all day long, but you don't have any diversity to participate in that goodness, right? In that creation. And then the reverse, of course, is having all that difference without any skills to harness that difference, without any abilities to enable people to feel safe enough to bring that diversity to a process and contribute it. So either way, there are two sides of a coin, and they're so necessary to each other. And it's a 1 + 1 = 5 scenario, because we want our organizations to look like the world that we serve, and that's the D. But in order to create something amazing, that those diversities, both visible and invisible, because remember, many of our diversity dimensions are invisible. All of that, I think, the goal is for us to feel that none of a single part of who we are is going to derail people's respect for us, people's appreciation of us, people's ability to value what we know, but also who we are.
Yeah.
And that's a really interesting difference to make, because most people in the workplace, it's all about expertise, right? It's like what you know how to do, what you were trained to do, what you went to school, what you studied, whatever. But the power also of having a diverse workforce in every way is the wisdom that comes from our lived experience. Being able to bring our intuition, bring our lens on a problem, or something that nobody's solved before. That those tough things are cracked, I think, because of if we can enable the creative abrasion that happens between people, not just who went to different schools and had studied different disciplines, but also have walked through the world in a different body, in a different identity, and develop the things that we develop, as an LGBTQ person, the resilience, the courage, the emotional intelligence, the appreciation for difference and exclusion, just the unique things that I've had to overcome in really getting down to the basics of who am I, what do I need, how do I want to be treated, what's right, what's wrong, how do I, in the face of stigma and bias, still shine and still rise? Like, how do I know that and yet have the confidence to stand up and come out every single day on stages, which is what I do now. Like, how do you tolerate all of that? Like, how do you carry your identity, and bring your expertise and value your identity as part of that, and do that, openly and courageously? And that's the moment we're in right now, which is what I advise people to say, look, like we need every voice to rebuild something better. Like we
Mm,
need every single part of every single one of us,
mm,
including our privileged identities, which I know we'll talk about in a bit, to really craft what's next.
mm.
So that's sort of the way that I think about that. And I don't even remember your question at this point because
It's
it's off
inclusion. It's
on a planet
inclusion. So
somewhere.
yeah, no, it's fine. I mean, I think I was fascinated that you get laid so much emphasis to the word inclusion, and even in your first book, and
Yeah.
continue to. And I think you've answered the question, which is for those who are listening, you're talking about how these are glued together and they're interdependent, they're symbiotic.
Yes.
A good fun analogy would be if you have a monolithic organization, let's say everyone looks the same and sounds the same
Yeah.
gender, same race, and so on. You can still be inclusive because you can drive engagement and make everyone feel like they're part of the organization. But if you've got no diversity, then you're not really, it's not really working. Where I was taking this was just to throw an element of globalism and globalization here. Having studied the world in different ways, East, West, and so on, I'm in London, of course, but I have some experience of markets like India. And it's interesting. I'm, in fact, writing an article right now on the global faces of diversity and inclusion, and East, West, and digital. East, West, and digital. And, and you might pick that up quickly because my question to you in a moment will be related to this. So if you think of DNI, and of course in your book, a lot of the DNI practices and policies, ways of thinking, let's take the workplace as our customer. Let's just say that's the target, right?
Mm-hmm.
Then the way DNI is executed and rolled out in the West, when I say West, I mean Europe, UK, US generally, versus the East. And in the East, I'm just going to stay with India for a moment. I'm not going to bring in China and other markets and even the continent of Africa for a second, but just in a market like India, it's got 1.4 billion people. It's topical. It's an interesting study in itself. I've seen some major differences in the way DNI is done in large companies in the West and in India, for example, where you have race matters, but not that much because of obvious reasons. But there are other elements in this fantastic, and it's a terrible image, but we don't use slides, but for those who are going to buy the book, this is this iceberg that Jennifer talks about. And it's very, very important. And it's, yes, we all know about icebergs, what you see above is 10%. 90% at the bottom. What's at the bottom here and the way it's been detailed is fascinating because it's got things like, apart from the obvious ones, it's got age, it's got survivor, trauma, talents, caregiver, single parent, political affiliation. We know all about that, of course. Education, lived experiences, we know about that. Introvert, extrovert. Okay. And many, many others. And what I noticed when I traveled out to a non-Western part of the world is that diversity is done differently. The language is different, of course, and it's not necessarily always English. The language is different. And there are different facets and faces of diversity. And I know you talk a lot about diversity of thought and different elements of diversity in the below the waterline. In your experience, have you seen, or do you believe that DNI, when you think about DNI in the workplace, do you believe it needs to be in the future of DNI? Does it need to be altered and customized and worked on in a diverse way, you, me, and everyone from different backgrounds, so we can create unique models of diversity that are fit for purpose for different parts of the world? But because, of course, one size cannot fit all. That would be ignorance. So tell me how. I'm sure you've got stories of how you've seen this with different leaders from different backgrounds.
Yeah, well, absolutely. The American model on DEI has been criticized because it tends to be exported,
Sure.
and like sort of overlaid instead of customized, which it really needs to be. Even just starting with diversity, what does diversity mean in a particular country? And to me, I would look at, so if our goal, we look at our customers, we look at our demographics and the geography, and then we look at our customers, which could be global, but can also be local. And we say, where do we not reflect that world? Who are we missing? So it's not here's your checklist that needs to be the same around the world. If we're just getting started on looking at gender diversity, for example, in Asia, then the conversation and maybe LGBTQ, but maybe it's more socioeconomic. Maybe it's caregiving and parenting. The focus area should be driven by the locality and be driven by the mismatch, the gap between our workforce composition, just to take one way of looking at it, and the composition of the world that we serve. And where do we want to be so that we can capture market share, capture talent, make that talent feel comfortable here? And if the focus is just one or two identities, because it is it's a very homogeneous country, there's nothing wrong with that. It wouldn't make any sense to overlay, the 12 diversity dimensions that most, US based conversations orient around, which they're sort of the dirty dozen. It's like a common list, it's what you see in the larger US founded companies. They are multinationals, but they look at these like 12 dimensions,
Right.
So anyway, I would say that it has to be driven by the business care abouts, goals, the environment in which they operate, and what they're missing. And then inclusiveness simply means, how can all of us participate then in understanding and forwarding this, the work of closing that gap? And so who I am endeavoring to include, and some people have issues with the word inclusion, by the way, since we're talking about it, they don't think it goes far enough, because there's the feeling of inclusion is, oh, well, I'm being included in your system. So
okay.
Over the last couple of years, there's been a lot of debate on whether this word, some people really don't like this word that are in my field.
Right.
Because I, as an outsider, don't want to be I don't want to like you to throw me a bone and like include me in your system. Your system needs to change. And we need to all not just pull a folding chair up to your table, but the system needs to change. We need to build a different table together, and we need to build it differently from the start. So I just want to say that too, because as we're hitting this word like really hard, I like it because it's very much, to me, a skills-based word, meaning that it's something that is actionable, that people can do regardless of who they are and how they identify. They can learn how to, modify their behavior to enable and modify their decisions. Who's around the table? How do I monitor the conversation? How am I putting boundaries around giving credit where credit is due, or team dynamics, or bias when it shows up, or microaggressions? Like I want leaders that I work with to feel that this is something I can learn, and this is something that I can do, talk about, enforce, hold myself and others accountable for. It feels to me very, very actionable for a leader. And I come from a leadership development place. So I'm always thinking about that leader. I have that person in mind who can, if they choose to, develop competency and ultimately expertise in this. So that's why I like the word. But I think, it does the whole question of whose system are we including somebody into? And is that the right direction to be going? Because the system as it exists is not inclusive by design. And that's what got us here. Like, this is why we're having problems. I always say, like, that we did not have an inclusive set of architects at the table that built the workplace. Yeah. Right. So we weren't there. Anyway, so
can I give you a good example around that? So when you look at two operating models in the world, so you look at Asia, you look at the culture of collectivism, right? People or families are tight, and you grow up together, and so on and so forth. It's the opposite in the West, at least in the last 50 or 70 years, which is individualism. And so so it's interesting when you come out. I had a fantastic conversation with one of the pioneers of the LGBTQ plus movement in India just 3 or 4 days ago, Sharif Ranika, who's on his second book, and the book is called Queer Sapien. And I will, of course, do a connect here. And, he said something interesting. He said, look, the problem with collectivism in Asia is that there is a unsaid, unspoken sense of pressure and duty to follow the norm. So conformity is very high. It's supposed to be high, and individuality, which is this is my way and this is who I am, is not tolerated, because you have to keep the the system working, so the core of the collective is always alive. Think of it like an energy dynamo in the center, and the collective is around it. That you can't screw with that. So you've got to do everything. We know the process. We know how we need to be living our lives. We know that there's a system that you've got to get married at a certain point. You've got to have kids at a certain point. This is what you need to do in your life. There are clear expectations from the family, and the family will look after you when your chips are down. Of course, when you can't get a job and you've got no work, you will live here. When you need a promotion, a phone call will be made and a friend of a friend will help you get a job. So you're protected. It's almost like a bit of a mafia. You're protected and you're not allowed to break away. And so therefore it's much harder to come out when you're suffocated by the system. And individuality is not really understood. You're like, well, why? Why? Because we're a total collective. Now that operating model is the operating model. And the next generation is sort of screwing with that a little bit and trying to disrupt it a little bit. And let's see where it ends up. In the West, individuality is extremely important. And then when you think of one more element, which we can discuss later, is language. So we're conversing in English. Okay. Now, English, its semantics, nomenclature, vocabulary is, you and I speak it. So this is the way you and I communicate. If I come out and I start speaking Hindi or you speak Spanish, each one of these words means something totally different. I may need 4 words to describe inclusivity in Hindi. Or in fact, I might say, there is no word for inclusivity in Hindi. There is another word, which is about love and community and commune. That is inclusivity. And so it's important to realize this, because I think moving forward 15, 20, 30 years down the line, D&I, I hope, will manifest itself so differently.
And I hope so.
Yeah.
I hope it does, because it has to translate. And also there's fatigue around it too.
Yes.
Like, I think there's I cope with a lot of resistance that I think comes from I've been left out of this, like, or, oh, this is taking something away from me. So already I come into rooms and I'm tasking myself with coming up with different ways of speaking about it. Like to your point, even in this country, because it is a trigger for people. And there's, unfortunately, we're at this place where it's associated with like a scarcity mentality. And it bums me out every single day that I have to spend time kind of undoing that in order to create a different possibility for what the work is. I have to fight my way through that. So anyway, I think your point is well taken. And really at the end of the day, these are names for things, but they're inadequate. But really what we're going after is the human, the full human, the heart, the blending of purpose and heart and alignment with who we are. We want our institutions to be healthy places. I love to try to speak about this in ways that won't create defensiveness and sound like a new conversation, because that's how you get your audience to listen. I mean, we have to get creative as a keynote speaker. You're sort of paying attention to, how do I need to speak about this in a way where somebody won't dismiss me and this message as, oh, she doesn't get it, she's not from my world, or whatever, she's going to call me a bad person, or God forbid, it's not why I'm there. And I try to be extremely sensitive to when people are with me and when they're not. And if they're not, I'm not going to stick to my guns. I'm going to bob and weave and shift and and come from a different door and try to come in many different ways, because what's most important to me is to be heard, but not from an ego perspective, but to have something land for somebody, and I love Under the Waterline, all of those descriptors, and some of which you just mentioned. It was meant to enable every single person to see themselves somewhere in what I was talking about. That is what that is there for, so that they will engage with me, so that they will engage with this concept of, am I happy? Am I fulfilled? Do I feel safe? Am I able to contribute? And then once I'm done thinking about that, are others around me safe, able to contribute, feeling like they can, truly achieve what they're here to achieve on this earth? And I hope to awaken some empathy, both for the self and for others, in that process of considering, who we are. And then what is the responsibility we have and the opportunity we have as humans? I think America could stand to think about the collective. That's what actually I struggle with, is the up or out, individualistic, like, as long as I get mine, scarcity, hierarchy. Like, it's actually not helpful. It is in terms of being heard and telling your story. and being bold and being yourself, but it's not helpful in terms of the responsibility that we need to feel more for each other, even if we don't walk in the same shoes. If I could sort of ignite that, I think that would fuel this work. But right now, it very much feels like we're lost in our own narratives and we're not really feeling that responsibility to each other.
Yeah, you're bang on. And that's why I raised it as an issue, because I think that individualistic, it's got two sides to it. One is, like you said, the ability to amplify, but then of course, then there's a level of ego and selfishness that also creeps in, which I think is the awakening globally that we see, which is positive, I think, to a large extent. I want to take you to, this is a great time, a segue into the inclusive leader continuum. And if I may, something just triggered something, your words triggered something in my mind, which was what you describe yourself as doing. I feel you're a behavioral architect. Those are the two words I put together, because here's why. It's a random example. So Martin Luther King created a movement. He didn't have to conform. He created a movement. Of course, the cause was powerful and compelling. It was race related. And till his last breath, he continued to campaign and, was a great communicator. That's generally quite helpful. And I know that you've quoted him somewhere in your book, if I remember correctly.
Yes.
And beautiful quote. And so in a way, we need people who are championing a cause for us and driving the macro agenda at a global level, And then what you're doing is important, because the people, organizations employ the most amount of people in the world. That's where everyone gets paid, under capitalism. And they have a responsibility to those people. They want them to be at peak state, to do the best they can, to feel loved, joyful, and feel like they're valued at work. And suddenly people realize that they're diverse people in the company. Like, there's more to you than meets the eye. People have realized, oh, of course, and you should be aware of these things. And we've gone through a bit of a curve, haven't we? We've gone through extremities in being politically correct as well, let's be honest. And that's also put off a lot of people who are, as you describe, unaware, which I'm going to come to in a second. I love that. Actually, it's a really very powerful, simple, but so powerful model. And, your work is to get into the weeds of an organization. And that is why you do need to be diplomatic, and you need to sense and respond and be careful about how you say what you say and not create too much conflict. But it is a very hard job. I just want to make it very clear to people who think it's easy just to write a couple of books and then become a consultant, because there are many people who do write books and many people who are consultants, and there are some who are incredible and some who are not so incredible. And it's important to distinguish. And it is hard to change people's minds, especially rigid leaders who are like, how dare you? Who are you? I've done my job before.
They're horrible.
So your model, I want to bring this to this model. So help educate us on this model. Again, I'm traditional. This is the model. I have notes in the book, but I have 2 copies of it. So hope you don't mind if you get offended that I put notes in your book, but that's how I learn.
Are you kidding?
That's how I learn from your work. So talk us through the inclusive leader continuum. What is it, and how can one use it? Do you mind if I use the CEO as your target? So that I'm a CEO of a company. You've walked in. Someone told me that you're amazing. I saw you on StraightTalk, and I thought, wow, she's compelling. And I called you in for a 30-minute meeting, and we're having a great conversation. And then suddenly you say, hey, listen, let me tell you about the inclusive leader continuum. Off you go.
Okay. Ooh, I love that. All right.
Yeah.
First of all, acknowledging that we're all in different places. You brought up earlier that we listen as teachers, we listen and we hear what's resonating, like through people's questions. And when you write a book, you really learn what resonates, and you learn where there was a missing piece. And then you learn what you built, hopefully address the missing piece, hopefully, right? That's the hope. And somehow you came up with that out of your brain and heart, when you wrote it, because we write sometimes in a vacuum. What I tried to create was a way to nail down something that I think is very mysterious to people,
Okay.
that we all kind of talk about at the 30,000 foot view, but like it really needs to be very specific about how I grow as a human and where I am in my evolution, because I believe we're always evolving. I believe all of us can evolve. And I think we can evolve at any age. So I'm speaking to the CEO who's probably a Gen Xer, maybe a
Mm-hmm.
baby boomer even.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm in that cohort too. And in some ways, we're as brilliant as we've ever been in our lives at this age, because of the lived experience and the years of. So we have a lot of agility and plasticity in the brain, I think, to change. Now we're afraid of changing and experimenting, right? Because of the environment. But
Mm.
I want to disarm that. I want to create enough of a trusted conversation where somebody can say, this is honestly where I think I am.
Mm.
And here's what I understand, and here's what I don't understand. And what do the steps look like ahead of me? Everybody wants to know if you take on a project, losing weight or getting healthy or saving money, you sort of have a regimen, and you need to have some habits, and you need to have some things that are repeatable, I think, like a routine or a ritual. And
Yeah.
you need to have some self-awareness around, where am I in my journey? Am I in the beginning stages, and am I sort of in the middle, or am I fairly advanced? And I would say to the CEO, let's go through, the 12 that I mentioned earlier, which is ethnicity, gender identity, sexual orientation, socioeconomic background, age, veteran status, abilities, disabilities, LGBTQ stuff. And just kind of, talk with the leader about what kind of scorecard would they give themselves using the 4 stages of the continuum. Like, where would they say they are? What do they do well? What are they comfortable with? Where do they have the language? Where don't they have the language? What do they care about naturally? Like, what kind of lights them up from perhaps an injustice
Mm.
perspective? Like, some CEOs will say, oh, like my daughter just came out to me, and now I'm on this road of becoming an ally for her,
Right.
and learning all these thumbs and becoming galvanized, because now it's really real. So I
Yeah.
think too, making this stuff real is part of why so many people are lost, because it may be real in the headlines, it may be real in what we read or watch, but it may just not be. Many of us who don't experience certain identities can push them and keep them at arm's length. We can kind of tune it out and say, well, it's not my experience, therefore it's not something I need to deal with.
Sure. Yeah.
Now, yeah, so CEOs though have to deal with it, and leaders have to deal with it, and they get to deal with it because guess what? Studying it expands your consciousness and expands your heart and expands your ability to build trust across difference. And there is no leader that can afford to not be good at that and interested in that. So
Mm.
you
Mm.
said, like, it's nice to have an appetite now for what we're talking about. And I think the appetite can come from, and I'm fine with it coming from, that self-interested place, which is, I am no longer the effective leader that I thought I was. Like,
Mm.
I can't use what I used to use. It's not going to achieve what I
Right.
need to achieve. I need a new toolkit. I need to understand, and I need to humble myself to the fact that I am not a finished product. And in
Mm.
fact, when it comes to this topic, I am in the infancy. I am literally like a 1.0. And by the way, everybody beneath me in the hierarchy and those who are new in career have more expertise than I do. So the humility that a senior leader has to sort of say, I've got to talk about what I don't know. I
Mm.
have to do that publicly, and then I have to be working privately to move myself along.
Yeah. Great point.
And so that's always kind of a fun place to go. And then from there we can determine, okay, so how do you move forward? What are the ingredients of that?
Okay. And so, what are the 4 components here then of the consider?
Yeah.
Because many people aren't aware, of course.
Yes, yes. Well, unaware is the first one. So
Okay.
this is just like any other model. This is
Mm.
a progression model. It's a
Mm.
maturity model.
Okay.
It's as if like you're going through the 5 stages of grief, if you know that model, which I love. And there's a lot of other models that do this.
Mm.
So it goes from unaware to aware to active to advocate. And to me, it's my own journey as well. It's where I have awakened out of unaware. Oh goodness, I don't know what I don't know.
Mhm.
I'm in aware, which is I know what I don't know, and it's a lot, and
Mm.
I need to go
Mm.
learn.
Mm.
And then I move from, okay, now I know, and now I'm going to move into active. And active is the third, which is I think where a lot of us who have been paying attention the last couple of years, we want to do more, say more, get more public, have new conversations, but it's scary and risky and we're going to do the wrong thing. And of course we're going to be imperfect. It stands to reason. And then advocate is the fourth, which is, I call advocate stage, that final sort of aspirational stage. I'm the squeaky wheel. I'm the sort of tireless advocate. I'm pushing, I'm challenging, I'm questioning myself and others and wanting people and myself to be better. And questioning, why did this happen? Why does it keep happening? What could we do differently? Why are we just treating the symptom and not the disease? How could we be bolder? I think people in that stage they're comfortable using their voice and they're courageous and fearless in using it. And they know where, and they know how to push on a system. And ideally they know how change happens. Like you have to kind of be a student of human behavior to, know how that happens.
It's interesting because in my mind, and again, you can tell me about how it's going and how it's progressing based on your experience. So if this was a sales funnel to a large extent, I would imagine that the top of the funnel, the unaware is pretty big. And then aware is a little bit smaller, active is smaller. And then of course, advocates or advocacy is even smaller. But actually we would love it to be, if we can, reverse the other way around, or it's some sort of balance, or you see the passengers travel through the funnel in an accelerated way, right to at least the point of active. Because in a way, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, it's good to realize you don't know what you don't know. And that's great. And then, you're studying and you're in the game. Sometimes I feel, I mean, it's, maybe we're biased, but we're active and advocates of this cause, right? We're active advocates. We're active advocates.
Yes,
you can also have advocates who are inactive.
Inactive.
There's another theme for you because, I do know some advocates who are truly, they follow your description beautifully, but they're inactive. And so what I mean by inactive is I don't mean they're sitting on a sofa staring at the ceiling. I just mean that the level of the intensity of the activity has dipped for whatever reason. And there are many out there who've been campaigning for a long time. So there's fatigue. You used that word fatigue earlier.
Yeah, fatigue.
There are some tired DEI campaigners out there.
Oh, that's for sure. That's what you just took the words right out of my mouth. I mean, advocate, that final phase is exhausting. I don't think people can live there because your nervous system is constantly being like jacked. You're constantly fighting and having hard conversations and pushing, and you're stepping outside of your comfort zone and your people too. I mean, I think too, stepping outside of your community. And if that community happens to be, say, for argument's sake, other white men, when you step outside of that and you're critical of it, that feels like it has a lot of risk, and the risk is real of exclusion. So interestingly, when you take on these mantles, you all of a sudden you begin to question the norms, and people take that personally, and you have to be pretty strong. And that's why I think the muscle you build going through this continuum is really important. It's that growth mindset, right? The sort of, I think like a weeble wobble, like you push it over and it pops back. We get pushed over, we pop back, but we're a little bit smarter. Every time we do, we're a little bit stronger. We're a little bit more resilient, like bamboo. We're a little bit more able to not have our ego triggered, as we build the muscle of the ability to communicate around this and take action, we become extremely, I think, centered. We find that core that we come from that is unassailable. And that is a core belief. And then we layer on the skills and the positive attitude, because you have to believe in people. You can't, if you're skeptical about people, it makes this work really hard. And if you're skeptical about yourself, it makes it hard. I encourage people a lot. I say, you can do this. Like, you might look at yourself and say, Jennifer, I can never contribute. Like, I have had so much privilege in my life. Like, look at me, look at the schools I went to, look at the family I grew up in. And I say, to the contrary, everything you've been given and that you've earned, yes, earned, unearned, doesn't matter to me. All of that needs to be, and you can put that in play. You can use that. You can apply it to help and change systems and circumstances. That is a fuel that enables you to have, I think, even more bandwidth. When you fit into a system, you have more bandwidth, I think, to use your voice, because you also have less risk because you're one of the insider group. And so
Correct.
for you to step outside and say, I don't think we're doing this in the most inclusive way. Can we revisit this? Can we redesign this? Like, I'm not happy about this. Let's go back to the drawing board. Whatever. I don't feel good about this. Like, that is the kind of stepping outside that somebody who has the privilege of being an insider can do. And that literally shakes up the system much more than I could ever shake it up if I'm, an early in career, LGBTQ female, employee who's like trying to push change from the bottom. I always say to anybody who has a leadership position in seniority, the smallest thing that you do ripples through and is watched and is seen and begins to challenge the norm about what we expect of somebody that looks like you every time you do that. So I try to say, like, there's this isn't hard, but people try to act like it's hard. I think it's leadership. I mean, it's not the easiest job in the world, but
yeah, you hit the nail on the head. A few more questions very quickly, and I know it's I really do want to ask you this. Going back to the CEO, have you found that I'm being a little bit sort of provocative here. You look at the NASDAQ listed companies, okay, and it's very clear that the majority of the CEOs in these companies are men, and many of them are white men. I'm not saying all of them, but many of them are, and that's just the byproduct of whatever history, circumstances, context. But we won't go into that today. And do you believe that these CEOs, and this is a personal question, so you answer it the way you want to, and you can refuse to answer it if you want. Do you generally believe that these CEOs, in fact, let me reframe the question. Where do majority of these CEOs sit in your model today?
Majority?
Yeah.
And I would say barely out of unaware to aware. Like, okay. I think they're taking their cues from their HR people. They're being told what to say and given talking points, if they even do that. So I think it's very performative. It's very much like performing the role and what they need to say, but they have not embodied it. Like, it hasn't moved from something that's either forced on you or given to you, but you've never really had to engage with it on a personal level. And so there's that missing piece. So it's a bummer. And it's generational too. I think that, like we see with DEI adoption, it just increases the younger you go, because this new generation, they grew up in a very different world. So it's a really kind of hard thing to figure out how to teach people, certain generations who were told to, for example, say, I don't see color, to minimize difference, which is what I don't see color really does.
Interesting.
And to, we were of the generation where, like, when we realized we had a gender problem, first of all, it was the women's problem to solve. That's because men don't have a gender. It's not about that. But it was also just, well, I'm going to treat everybody the same and, lead women like I lead men, and that was the conversation. And that was the right answer at a period in time to sort of not see difference. And that's one of the biggest sort of pro tips I give my audiences, is to say, that is in the past. Difference wants to be seen. People want to be seen, heard, have input, be able to be valued, not spend time covering and keeping all that under the waterline of the iceberg. Yeah. And the best leaders know how to, regardless of how they identify, even if you are a white straight man, there are beautiful white straight men who lead beautifully on this. It is possible. It is not common, but I have heard it. I've seen it. I've witnessed it. I've taken notes madly. What did they say? How did they say it? How did that come across? Why did that feel so authentic? How did they blend, the corporate, like, business language with their personal story? How did they make this personal? How does it, like, why do I believe them? And I don't believe so many others, right? You can really see through it too. So it's a very very personal and challenging choice that CEOs, I think, have to make right now to say, I'm going to take this in and I am going to originate this work. I'm
Mm,
not going to wait for it to happen to me. I'm not going to be passive and wait to receive. I'm not going to jeopardize myself because, by the way, they're also at great risk of not being somewhere on this continuum journey, because you cannot hope to lead successfully, without at the very least talking about, what am I learning? What am I feeling challenged by? What did I assume? What have I learned? And what's been hard? And, what have I not experienced in my life because of the
mm,
way I grew up and where I was planted in this world? And that was the accident of birth.
mm,
But what am I doing with it? To make this company a place where all kinds of people can thrive.
mm,
I just sometimes wish I could just script it for them, and then it could be the training wheels with which they then begin to develop the muscle, and through saying it over and over again, that it begins to deepen, and
yeah.
that they begin to add their own flavor to it, their own stories, their own personalization to it, and that they make themselves vulnerable in moments that I think really resonate with people. And that is completely anti what we have defined as
Mm.
leaders. I mean, it's a complete shift. And so I know I'm asking for a lot. I acknowledge that. And yet I'm not sure we have a choice.
Mm, mm. It reminds me of, it's interesting because Daniel Kahneman came out with this really interesting model ages ago. It's really simple around decision making, but it relates to this because he said when people make decisions of CEOs usually, because it was coming out of the 2008 crisis, when there was groupthink and stuff. And he said there
Mm,
are four elements. There's personal experience. And I'll come to why this is interesting. Personal experience, and it could be, either you've got the exposure or you don't, right? Personal experience, or you're
mm,
hanging around with the same people at the golf club. Then it's data, and you can choose to use the data however you want and cut it however you want, depending on who
mhm.
gives you the data, of course, at a CEO level. And
Yeah.
so your commanders in chief need to also have some sort of a quotient, EQ or DEIQ or whatever it may be, uh, to be able to deal with this. Then it's gut instinct, gut
Ah,
instinct, and
mhm.
finally external perspective. And it feels as if, with the way you describe the situation, most of these CEOs will be between unaware and aware, somewhere there. For them to move forward, maybe it's time that they accept that they need to bring in external individuals. I don't mean consultancies, the big four,
Yeah.
with the greatest of respect. I'm not here to have a go at those companies, but it is a little bit disturbing that these companies have taken nearly 8 billion, by the way, which was what was spent on DEI in 2022, which is now going to 16 billion, budgets doubling by 2026. And so every consultancy is armed up and they've just been hiring DEI experts. I don't know what that means, but anyway,
I know,
DEI
I know.
associates.
Don't get me
Um,
started.
who probably have done a local, DEI certification course at university that they've partnered with, of course, to say, produce courses, will you? Because how the hell do we charge $2,000, $10,000 a day, whatever it may be? And
Yeah,
so
right.
the problem is that if you don't go to the right people outside who at least are one of the marginalized. I mean, come on, at least you've got to go to someone who sits in one of these communities. That kind of makes sense, right?
Kind
Um,
of.
and to ask them to share their experiences, and then the model and the techniques and such stuff.
Mhm,
I
mhm.
think that should be, in the old days, I come from the technology background. In the old days, we used to say, you have a CEO coach or a CIO advisor and coach. And I won't name the companies I used to work for, but they had offerings and they used to be mentors to the
Yeah,
CEOs, like you said, speed
yeah.
dial and so on. I think there is the right time for it, not now, but there has to be some sort of sanity, some sort of semblance, some sort of equilibrium that needs to get created at some point where if you accept you can't do this yourself, you can't manage
Mhm,
it, you need to
mhm.
bring in a team of coaches or external people who kick you in the teeth from time to
Yeah.
time and say it the way it should be said, so you're aware of these issues and you should be able to debate with that individual like yourself intellectually, debate with data, debate politically, debate historically. You don't need 19 coaches, but let's say 3 or 4, and you
Mhm.
need to bring these people to the fore regularly if you believe you need a lot of help changing your mind, like convince me. This is the typical convince me that I should invest in this. Of course, that's what we've been taught,
Right.
It feels like the work you're doing in the books you're writing is going to become the foundation block and the cornerstone for a world, I hope, that is truly diverse at many levels. And let me close this off with something quite hilarious. I was asked recently, why did you do this Diversity Economics Institute? What's your driver? I said, apart from the obvious drivers, one of the drivers was, when I was a kid, I grew up on the diet of Star Trek. And I still love Star Trek. And I don't know if you ever watched Star Trek, but Star Trek in the old days had this guy called Captain Kirk. And then Jean-Luc Picard, who became very, very, popular. And throughout my life, when I was a little kid, since 6 or 7, I've been watching this. All I saw was there's a starship, and they go to different galaxies, not Earth, different galaxies. That means they're explorers. Got it. Okay, fine. And they meet different people from different backgrounds in those galaxies. And the starship commanding team are diverse. Someone's called Spock, who comes from another part of the world. I remember the old school one. There was a woman who was the technical genius. She was black. There was Commander Data. I mean, you had true diversity in your team. And then what I always remembered, and I thought diversity is just going to happen, isn't it? Because I saw people from a different race, like a Klingon race, that looked visibly different to us.
Yeah.
Okay. In a relationship with a human, and they found each other attractive. And I thought, wow. So we must have all these biases. Once you rip it all apart and it becomes common and the norm, might take time, we're all going to be diverse in some way, shape, or form. And so that's a bit of a story, but that's as ignorant as it may be as a child. That's what I thought. Everyone sees everyone for their merits. And Star Trek was my inspiration. You've inspired me immensely today. I've learned a lot through this conversation. I relate to so much of what you've shared, your background, your personality, your strengths, your skills, your courage to go off and write your books. And of course, the consultancy that you've built, Jennifer Brand Consulting, which we will absolutely promote. Every leader in a NASDAQ company should talk to you and not spend their money with the big four and then give you the little change left over, because I can tell you that's what happens. The $50 million contract goes there, and then you get the tiny ones, and you're like, right? I'm so much better, but okay, fine, I'll take it.
It's horrible.
That needs to change, right? That needs to change.
It does need to change. And you know what? Like, speaking of supply chain, like, fund the woman-owned business, like the LGBT-owned, the minority-owned business. Like, those are the drivers of the economy, and it's a huge and fast-growing world. And we solve problems differently, more innovatively. I think that there's a huge argument to be made to foster that, like, whole community and spend money there, because you're going to get more innovation and more expertise as well. I agree. It's sort of been a gold rush on DEI, as I've seen so many different firms of all different sizes basically rebranding themselves to take advantage of it. And it's we all kind of roll our eyes about it that have been in the work for a really long time. And, but while I'm glad, but I question how equipped people are that are being hired in to do this, because there's just not many of us to begin with that have the chops. And it's a discipline. Like, you've got to respect the discipline. You can't just stick, like you say, management consulting has not been about that, and has never valued it, honestly, until it started to make money. Yeah. But that's not the reason why. I don't know. There's some misalignment there. I'll be diplomatic.
Big time. We need to talk about a lot of things offline. And I think we need to I certainly am here to help you through StraightTalk and everything that I do through my institutes to promote your agenda, your cause, your books, and vice versa, all the support we can get. But I think if we work together, I know it sounds old school and trite, but if we really genuinely work together and find ways to help one another, whether it's, vision, ideals, values, and commercially, it is what it is, then I think we can really move the needle and get those CEOs who are in that part of your continuum, at the lower part of the continuum, push them along. Wouldn't it be amazing if you could publish the faces of many CEOs on your continuum who are at the top end of the funnel and those that you believe are on the bottom end? Because of course you've done your research, so you know who's on the bottom end. And the next thing I was going to say is I would love to see, please share who you think is on the more advocacy end. And it'd be good to do some pattern analysis to figure out why they are the way they are. Background,
Yes.
race, religion, context, trauma, God knows, all of the things below the waterline. How do those things relate to that CEO who might be a white man who's able to speak in a compelling and, beautiful way as you described it. So look, today I can talk to you for hours, of course, and we might be thousands of miles away. I'm in London, and you're in, which part of the States are you in, by the way?
New York State.
Not too far, 6
Not
hours.
too far.
No, 6 hours. No. So today has been absolutely fantastic for me. Thank you, Jennifer, for coming on our show. Please go buy this book if you haven't. And if you want to buy the 3 books before, then buy them all, of course.
Please.
And Jennifer Brown Consulting, where can people find you? What's the website, and how do we get hold of you?
Sure. Thank you for having me again. So everybody, LinkedIn, you can find me. Jennifer Brown Consulting .com is our company site. And then Jennifer Brown Speaks is another sort of speaker and author website. So you could check that out for more sort of dedicated content relating to me and my message. And then on Instagram or Jennifer Brown Speaks, Twitter, I'm at Jennifer Brown. For now, who knows what's happening over there. But anyway, we're everywhere, and we welcome everyone into our programs. Please just come and investigate and join and learn, and send us feedback and tell us what we're missing. Tell us where we're unaware and we need to move into aware in terms of diversity dimensions and nuances that we may be missing. I think it's so wonderful to feel we're all learning together. And that's invaluable for me, because I'm only as smart about this, and I can only communicate what I'm told and how I'm learning what I don't know. So I always love inviting people of all identities, please, to come and contribute.
Brilliant. Before we close, 10 seconds, how has the experience been for you today? Just a few words to help us be better at what we do.
Oh, it's been great. I love how much you researched you really dug into the models, things resonated. You sharing that with me makes a huge difference for me. It just feels good, number one, but I think it also allows us to have a deeper, more nuanced conversation about this. And I love imagining that CEO. It's fun to kind of pick an avatar and say, so let's like imagine we're in that room. How do you conduct yourself? How do you take advantage of that opportunity? And questioning sort of how and why do people change? It's such a sort of existential question that to me is universal and very important for us to understand, as much as we will probably never understand it. But the effort to keep kind of pulling that thread is really fun to do with somebody like you, with all the disciplines that you are familiar with, and your global questions. Great. Really important to distinguish, where are we exporting something in a way that doesn't fit and kind of hurting the cause and the effort, and how we need to meet people where they're at, meet countries where they're at, meet companies where they're at, meet CEOs where they're at. Like that could be the overarching theme from today, is just doing that really well, really graciously, and laying out a path, and then letting people elect to go along it.
Beautiful. Thank you. And we are going to do some stuff together. I'm pretty certain of that.
I hope so.
And, very excited about
that should
this.
happen.
Yeah. And thank you for coming on Straight Talk. We look forward to having you back when you've got your next book being released. I'm sure you will at some point. And for our guests out there, when you watch this, click on the right there, you'll see the subscribe button. Join this community. We are 30,000 strong, and we need all the support we can get because of our not-for-profit mission. Jennifer, have a wonderful day, wonderful week, a wonderful year. Keep changing the world and architecting behaviors as you do. And speak to you soon.
Oh, I appreciate it. Thanks, Ash.
Pleasure.